Hey there, and welcome to my video podcast here on YouTube, Tell Me a True Crime Story. My name is Holly, and I am your host. Thank you so much for being here. I am really grateful that you chose to be here and check out this channel. I call this case, this episode, She Tried to Get Away, because our young victim in this case, she did just that. She tried so hard to save her life, but in the end, she was just trapped. This case has stuck with me and haunted me forever, ever since I first heard it. If you like how I go over the case and how this video is delivered, I hope you'll subscribe to my channel. Tell your friends, family, and coworkers about this channel. The links to my socials are in the description box. And just thanks again for being here, and big, big hugs to all of you. Now, let me tell you a true crime story. First, let's get a feel for the area in which, these events take place. It happens in two different locations. The first one is in Columbus, Ohio, in Franklin County, in the Wineland Park area of Columbus, Ohio. Wineland Park is about 2 miles north of downtown Columbus and is near Ohio State University. The Wineland Park neighborhood is 30 square blocks and has a population of approximately 4,800 people. As far as crime rates in this area, around the time that our story takes place in 1991, according to winelandpark.org, by the 1990s, Wineland Park had the highest violent crime rate in the city. The other location where our story occurs is in a rural farming community in West Jefferson, Ohio, in Madison County. This is about a 30-minute drive to the west of the city of Columbus, Ohio. So now that we've covered the where, let's talk about who this story is about. Jessica Lyn Keen was born on Wednesday, September 24th, 1975, to Rebecca and James Keen. She had an older sister named Heather. Jessica attended Oakview Elementary School in Kettering, Ohio, where she was in the gifted program in 4th, 5th, and 6th grades. The then coordinator of gifted education in Kettering, Tom Tudor, said that Jessica was in the upper 3% of all students at her grade level in the district, and that her IQ was in the mid 130s. So just for reference, the average IQ in the United States is 98. So Jessica was a bright girl. She attended Kettering Junior High School before she moved to Columbus. By 1988, Jessica's parents had divorced, and Jessica and her mom moved a little over an hour to the northeast to be closer to her maternal grandparents. Jessica was 13 years old at the time. In Columbus, Jessica attended Westland High School. In her freshman year, she was an honor roll student and on the cheerleading squad. When she was a sophomore, she met Shawn Thompson. He was a senior, and he was on the football team. They soon started to date, and Jessica quickly became all consumed with Shawn. She started skipping school to spend time with him, and she lost interest in cheerleading and her studies. Shawn got in trouble for being habitually truant from school, and eventually he just stopped going to school altogether. Then one day, Jessica's mom, Rebecca, she got a call from Jessica's school principal. The principal told Rebecca that Jessica had been skipping school, her grades had dropped considerably, and that she'd quit cheerleading. Rebecca was unaware that Jessica had quit the cheer team. She was none too happy to learn these things about her daughter, and thought that a lot of her wayward behavior could be attributed to the fact that she was dating Shawn. Since Rebecca felt that Shawn was a bad influence on Jessica and that he was too old for her, she forbade Jessica from seeing him anymore. Mother and daughter had many arguments over this, and tensions steadily grew between them. Rebecca asked the high school counselor if they could recommend anything to help the situation. The counselor referred them for counseling sessions at the Huckleberry House, a nearby safe house and crisis center for runaway and troubled teens. So on March 4th, 1991, Jessica was checked in for a short stay at Huckleberry House. She continued attending school at Westland High School while at Huckleberry House and got to and from school by using the city bus lines. With help from the counselors at Huckleberry House, Jessica and her mom began to work on rebuilding their relationship. By Friday, March 15th, 1991, Jessica had been staying at Huckleberry House for about 2 weeks, and she was supposed to go home the very next day when she went missing. On the afternoon of Friday, March 15th, Jessica had attended a group therapy session at 4:30 p.m. Then afterward, she called her boyfriend Shawn from Huckleberry House and they got into an argument. It was about the status of their relationship. When Jessica got off of the phone with Shawn, she asked her friend to go to the Westland Mall with her, which was about 10 miles away. She wanted to try to meet up with Shawn at the mall. She figured he might be there since it was a regular teen hangout. Jessica's friend said she couldn't go with her, so Jessica set out by herself. Between 6 and 6:30 p.m., Jessica's friend saw her standing at the bus stop at 8th Avenue and Summit Street, which was across the street from the Huckleberry House. That would be the last time any of Jessica Keen's friends or family would ever see her again. It turns out that while waiting at the bus stop, a car pulled up and the driver offered Jessica a ride. She told the man she was waiting for the bus. By now, it was dark out, and Jessica's only worry was trying to find Shawn, so she accepted the stranger's offer of a ride. However, the man didn't take her to the mall. He took her instead to a remote rural area in the next county to the west. He put duct tape over her mouth and her several times. But Jessica was feisty. She had an athletic build and she fought back. At some point, she got away from her captor. She jumped out of his car naked and ran for her life. The man left the car running, got out, and gave chase after her. Jessica ran like hell, ran as fast as she could. She didn't realize it at first, but she'd run into an old graveyard. Foster Chapel Cemetery was roughly 200 years old at the time our story takes place. Some headstones there date back to the late 1700s. It's in a very isolated area surrounded by acres and acres of farmland in all directions. At approximately 9 p.m., a man on his way home from work got off of I-70 and proceeded north on Plain City, Georgesville Road. Just south of Foster Chapel Cemetery, he came upon an abandoned car that was left running in the middle of the roadway with its headlights turned off. The man got out to investigate. He didn't see a driver in the car. He didn't hear anything. Unfortunately, and very sadly, where the car was left in the roadway was too far from the cemetery for this man to have been able to hear Jessica's desperate screams for help. That man couldn't have known it, but likely at that very same time, Jessica was frantic and terrified, looking for a hiding spot, desperately trying to save her life. She knelt down behind headstones, trying to hide from her kidnapper. She could see lights from a farmhouse off in the distance behind the cemetery. Jessica came out of her hiding spot behind a large headstone and started running toward that house, toward the only visible possible safe haven, that farmhouse. One of her socks came off as she ran. While running full speed in the pitch black darkness toward the lights of that farmhouse, Jessica slammed head on into a fence post at the back of the cemetery. The impact knocked her to the ground. Her captor caught up with her then. He went for a weapon of opportunity. He pulled from the ground a huge 70-pound headstone that was about 20 inches wide by 30 inches tall. He brought it down onto Jessica's head. He hit her in the head with it several times. The headstone broke in half. He threw both of the pieces of the headstone over the fence. As he fled the area, he got rid of evidence, discarding Jessica's clothes and tennis shoes by throwing them out of his car window. The man who'd been checking out the abandoned car running, just sitting in the middle of Plain City, Georgesville Road, he got back into his car at this time. He then saw a man running from the direction of the cemetery. That man got into the car that had been left running in the middle of the road. The witness thought this situation was strange, but didn't think much else of it, and he left. Meanwhile, counselors at Huckleberry House called Jessica's mom, Rebecca, to tell her that Jessica had missed the 11 p.m. curfew. Her mom was worried, but she assumed she was with her boyfriend, Shawn. Rebecca tried calling Shawn, but she couldn't reach him. Just after midnight, she filed a missing persons report with the Columbus Police Department. She continued to call around to see if anyone had seen or heard from Jessica. Then Rebecca finally heard from Shawn. He called her and said that Jessica wasn't with him and he didn't know where she was. The next morning, March 16, 1991, a man found a pair of blue jeans on the berm of the eastbound ramp to I-70 coming from Plain City, Georgesville Road. In the pocket of the jeans were COTA bus tickets. COTA, COTA. COTA stands for Central Ohio Transit Authority, the city bus line that Jessica used while staying at Huckleberry House. The jeans were turned over to the Madison County Sheriff's Office. About an hour later, another man found a pair of black and white Nike tennis shoes on Plain City, Georgesville Road, just north of Foster Chapel Cemetery. They were also turned over to the Madison County Sheriff's Office. The next day, a little bit after 12 noon on Sunday, March 17, 1991, a young photographer named Amy went to Foster Chapel Cemetery to explore and to take pictures of the pioneer-era gravestones. There, in the back corner of the cemetery, she discovered the body of a young white female. She left immediately to go make a call to the police. Detectives from the Madison County Sheriff's Office responded to the scene. The body at the back of the cemetery by the fence was nude, except for one muddy sock on her right foot and her bra, which had been pulled up and twisted around her neck. She was lying on her back. Her left leg was bent at the knee and her right leg was straight. Her arms were bent at the elbows and both hands were up near her head. Her face and upper chest were covered with dried blood. There were faint markings on her wrists. At the front of the cemetery, footprints were found in the mud beside the roadway and through a ditch. Following the direction of the footprints, investigators found a mud mark on the front fence of the cemetery. A short distance inside the front of the cemetery, there was a piece of duct tape on the ground with a big clump of human hair in it. Perhaps the girl had ripped off the duct tape to scream for help, or maybe even just to be able to breathe better because she was in a race for her life. A little further in, the girl's other sock was found. This sock matched the sock that remained on the girl's body. Both socks had yellow paint chips on the bottom of them, which suggested to detectives that the paint was most likely from the yellow striping on the road. They surmised the girl had been running on the roadway before she went into the cemetery. Still further into the cemetery, in the soft ground, there were knee and elbow impressions behind a headstone. Also, that headstone had been knocked askew. The young girl's knee bore an injury which was consistent with having banged it into a headstone. The trail of evidence painted a clear picture for detectives of how events had likely unfolded the night the girl was murdered. From the evidence, they surmised that the girl had escaped her kidnapper and ran naked in the cold. It had been in the low 30s that night. She was terrified as she ran along the roadway, then through the ditch to the white painted fence. She climbed over the wooden fence and fled into the cemetery. She knelt down behind a headstone, attempting to hide from the man who was in pursuit of her. Ultimately, she'd run in total darkness to the back southeast corner of the cemetery, where she collided with the fence post and fell to the ground. This surely stunned her and maybe even knocked her unconscious. Then the perpetrator killed her right there. A strand of her hair was found on that fence post. Near her body, on the other side of that fence, were both halves of the broken gravestone that Jessica had been bludgeoned to death with. The top half of the gravestone had the last name Henry on it. Both the top half and the bottom half of the gravestone had visible blood stains on them. An autopsy of the unidentified girl's body was performed on Monday, March 18, 1991. The autopsy was performed by then Deputy Franklin County Coroner Dr. Patrick Fardall. He performed a rape test kit which revealed sperm on her vaginal swab. A DNA profile was generated from that sperm. Dr. Fardall found numerous abrasions and lacerations to the young girl's head, neck, and body. She had contusions, bleeding around her brain, a fractured mandible, which is the jawbone, hemorrhaging of her cervical vertebrae, and she'd aspirated blood. Her cause of death was determined to be blunt force impact to the head. The first crucial step in the detectives' investigation was to identify their victim. They had to find out who she was. Of course, since she'd been found naked, there was no identification on her. The news reported the finding of the girl's body in the cemetery. Jessica's mom, Rebecca, received a call from a friend who was aware that Jessica was missing and asked Rebecca if she'd seen the news. Rebecca said she hadn't. Her friend informed her that a young woman's body had been found in a cemetery. Rebecca called the authorities in neighboring Madison County, where the cemetery was located, to see if the girl found was her daughter Jessica. Investigators from the Madison County Sheriff's Office went to Rebecca's home to show her pictures of the girl and the crime scene at the Foster Chapel Cemetery. Rebecca said that the girl in the pictures looked like her daughter, but it was not her. But it was her Jessica. Investigators looked at a photo of Jessica hanging on the wall, and they were pretty sure the body that had been found was indeed Jessica. Rebecca was understandably just a mother in denial. Investigators asked Rebecca and Shawn, Jessica's boyfriend, to go to the morgue to see if they could positively identify the body in person. However, while at the morgue just before they entered the room where the body was, investigators stopped Rebecca from going in. They thought that the sight of her daughter would be too much for her. Shawn went in alone and positively identified the body as Jessica's. Rebecca was still in denial that it was Jessica until she learned of a telltale scar on the finger of the girl's body. She now knew it was her Jessica. Detectives interviewed everyone at Huckleberry House in an attempt to build a timeline and see what useful information they might have to offer. They learned that Jessica was last seen at the bus stop on Friday evening. Since she'd argued with Shawn on the phone before her disappearance and left to go meet up with him afterward, they focused on Shawn as a possible suspect. Detectives learned that Shawn was in a car with 5 friends headed to Florida. They put out an APB on the car that he and his friends were traveling south in. The group of young men eventually got stopped in Georgia and were brought back to Ohio for questioning. They all denied involvement in Jessica's murder. A DNA sample was obtained from Shawn and from one of his friends that he'd been headed down to Florida with. Neither of the men were a match for the DNA sample obtained during Jessica's autopsy. The two were cleared as suspects. 5 years later, Madison County Sheriff's Office turned the case over to the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation. Authorities with the Bureau started by investigating the other 4 guys that had been traveling to Florida with Jessica's boyfriend right after her murder. They all submitted a sample of their DNA for analysis and were given polygraphs. Their DNA did not match the DNA obtained during Jessica's autopsy, and all 4 passed their polygraph exams. Therefore, they were also cleared as suspects in Jessica's murder. Over a decade passed, and investigators were getting desperate, but they continued to work the case. They re-examined evidence and they re-interviewed witnesses. A reward offered in Jessica's case reached up to $100,000. But Special Agent Costas with the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation had one last idea. In the years since Jessica's murder, the FBI had launched CODIS, the National DNA Database. You see, prior to CODIS, DNA samples had to be compared to known suspects. There wasn't yet a database that contained genetic profiles of convicted offenders, arrestees, and detainees. Ohio BCI Special Agent Costas wanted to submit a sample obtained at Jessica's autopsy through CODIS. However, there was one major problem. The semen sample obtained at Jessica's autopsy had been used up during prior DNA testing against the previous suspects in the case. There was no more of the original sample left to run further testing on. Nevertheless, Special Agent Costas took the empty test tube to a forensic scientist at the Bureau's crime lab. The scientist swabbed the empty test tube and looked at it under a microscope, and he was able to see sperm cells. Miraculously, the sample was 17 years old and microscopic, but yielded a full genetic profile. The DNA profile was entered into CODIS and came back with a match within minutes. 17 years later to the day when Jessica's body was found, the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation Crime Lab informed BCI Special Agent Costas of the DNA match. They'd finally identified Jessica's killer, Marvin Lee Smith Jr. In the 17 years since Jessica had been killed, his name had never come up in the investigation. Not much is known about Marvin Lee Smith Jr. He was born on Monday, November 19, 1956. He was 34 years old when he killed Jessica in 1991. At the time of Jessica's murder, he was living in the Short North neighborhood of Columbus, which is just south of the Huckleberry house where Jessica was staying. When authorities began looking into Marvin Lee Smith Jr., they discovered that he had a history of violence against women. His DNA had been taken and entered into CODIS when he was released from prison after serving time for rape and kidnapping. In one incident on February 4, 1990, around 5:45 p.m., 29-year-old Shirley Hutchins was walking near Greenwich Street and Loretta Avenue in Columbus when a car pulled up next to her. The driver asked her for directions. She leaned down to give the man directions, and he asked her if she performed sexual pleasures. He said he had $10 he would give her. She said no, she did not, and she started to walk away. The man then grabbed her coat and began pulling her into the car window toward him. She struggled to get away, and they fought. He hit her in the face, and she hit him back in the face. He jerked her purse off of her arm and threw it into his back seat. He then shoved her, which knocked her to the ground. Next, he backed up his car, then raced forward towards her, trying to run her over. She was able to jump out of the way and got his license plate as he sped off. She later identified Marvin Lee Smith Jr. in a photo array. He was arrested and charged with robbery. On July 16, 1990, he pleaded guilty to a lesser charge of misdemeanor theft. Later that same year, on December 7, 1990, at approximately 2:20 p.m., 20-year-old Melissa Bryant Lyles was waiting at a bus stop on Chittenden Avenue in Columbus when a man pulled up and asked her where she was going. She told him she was going to her brother's school. He asked her if she wanted a ride, and she said no. He then told her that her mom asked him to take her to the school, so she got into his car. He started driving, but not towards the school. He went in the opposite direction. The man repeatedly asked Melissa if she wanted to engage in sexual activity. She told him no. The man took her to his residence. She took off running, but he caught her and took her inside his home. He removed her clothes except for her underwear. Melissa tried again to escape, but the man caught her again and threw her onto the bed. He told her not to try to run away anymore and that he had a knife. He ordered her to take off her underwear and give him oral sex. He shoved her head down and put his in her mouth. Afterward, he raped her. She later identified Marvin Lee Smith Jr. in a photo array. He was arrested and charged with 2 counts of rape and 1 count of kidnapping. He pleaded guilty to the charges. On August 27, 1991, he was sentenced to 3 to 15 years on each count. The sentences were to run concurrently to one another, which meant that he served time for each count at the same time. They weren't back to back. Marvin Lee Smith Jr. attacked Shirley Hutchins about a year before Jessica's murder and raped Melissa Bryant Lyles about 3 months before Jessica's murder. The assaults on those two women were very similar to the MO used in Jessica's kidnapping and murder. All three young women were approached at a bus stop in the afternoon within a few miles of each other and within a few miles of Marvin Lee Smith Jr.'s residence. All were sexually motivated attacks. Marvin Lee Smith Jr. coaxed Melissa Bryant Lyles by telling her that her mom wanted him to pick her up and take her to her brother's school. Similarly, he lied and told Jessica he would give her a ride to the mall. When Shirley Hutchins and Melissa Bryant Lyles rejected his sexual advances, he became infuriated. He tried to run over Shirley Hutchins with his car, and he threw Melissa Bryant on the bed and threatened her with a knife. Authorities believe when Jessica escaped during the sexual assault, he became enraged and killed her. At the time of the DNA match in 2008, parole records showed that Marvin Lee Smith Jr. was living in North Carolina. Authorities went to North Carolina to talk to him about Jessica's murder case. They showed him a picture of Jessica, and he claimed to have never seen her before. This was good news to authorities because if he'd claimed to have known her and that they'd had a consensual sexual relationship or they'd had consensual sex, their DNA evidence against him would have been worthless. Then they confronted him with the DNA evidence. The odds of the DNA in Jessica's rape kit belonging to someone other than Marvin Lee Smith Jr. were 1 in 1 quintillion. And just to put that number into perspective, 1 quintillion means that there would be a 1 followed by 18 zeros. On March 28, 2008, 51-year-old Marvin Lee Smith Jr. was arrested for the sexual assault, kidnapping, and murder of 15-year-old Jessica Lyn Keen. He was extradited back to Ohio to stand trial. Prosecutors intended to seek the death penalty against him. On February 27, 2009, in order to avoid a death sentence, Marvin Lee Smith Jr. waived his right to a jury trial and entered into a plea agreement. He was sentenced by a 3-judge panel that imposed a sentence of 30 years to life in prison. He would be eligible for parole after serving 30 years. He started serving his sentence on April 7, 2009. Marvin Lee Smith Jr. is incarcerated at the Correctional Reception Center in Orient, Ohio, which houses an inmate population of about 1,700. He is Ohio Department of Rehabilitation and Correction inmate number A605036. In March of 2038, Marvin Lee Smith Jr. will have his first parole hearing, at which time he will be 81 years old. Marvin Lee Smith Jr. stole Jessica's whole life. He snuffed out her whole future. She was only 15 years old. Her mom, Rebecca, said Jessica had many plans, hopes, and dreams. She loved animals and wanted to major in veterinary medicine. She wanted to be a zoologist someday. Friends said Jessica was always laughing, smiling, and singing. A memorial cross was erected at Foster Chapel Cemetery where Jessica lost her life. The cross bears her name, and on it says, "Killed here, March 17, 1991. Jessica was laid to rest at Sunset Cemetery in Galloway, Ohio, which is only 7.5 miles away from the cemetery where she lost her life. If she were alive today in June of 2024, she would be 48 years old. This heartbreaking story reminded me of something from episode 11 from my podcast. That episode I called Nightmare in Knoxville. In that episode, I talked about how I remembered Oprah saying a long, long time ago to never let anyone take you to a second location.
A man named Sanford Strong came on and shared this. Never forgot it.
Rule number 1. And frankly, it's probably, in my opinion, the most important. Never allow them to take you somewhere else. Never. If everyone in this room and everyone watching this program has never drawn the line and made a decision on crime protection You better make it when they decide to move you from crime scene number 1 to crime scene number 2. Because the crime scene number 2 is going to be isolated. You won't choose it. You'll be the focus of the crime.
When Jessica got into Marvin Lee Smith Jr.'s car, she thought he was taking her to the mall, but instead he took her 20 miles west of the city to a desolate area. That was a strategic predator move on his part. He did that for a reason. He wanted to get Jessica to a lonely, dark place, somewhere that her screams for help could not be heard by anyone. If you are somewhere and someone tries to abduct you, fight them like your life depends on it, because it does. Do not let anyone get you in a vehicle to take you anywhere, because where they will take you will be isolated. They will have complete power and control over you and the situation. You will likely never make it out of there safely. Fight to stay wherever you are, at the first location, even if they have a weapon. Fight and scream for help. Run away. Just do not let them take you to somewhere of their choosing. Thank you so much for being here and watching. Please subscribe to this channel. And if you thought this story was interesting and you enjoyed the way that I delivered it, please like this video and leave a comment down below. That would help me out a ton, because this is a new channel and YouTube won't really put my videos out there until you guys start to interact with my videos and content. So please be generous with those likes and comments. And I can't say it enough. Thank you again for being here. I truly, truly appreciate each and every one of you. I hope that you and your family are happy, healthy, and together forever. That's kind of my mantra, and one day I'll get into where it came from and why I say it. But please join me in the next video when I'll tell you another true crime story. Big, big hugs to all of you.